This is Annie of ByAnnie.com and Patterns by Annie. Thank you so much for joining us today for Live with Annie. As usual, we've started the stream a bit early. This helps us get everything set up and broadcasting properly to our various platforms. You can find a countdown clock on the screen showing how long it will be until we actually go live. While you wait, please connect with us and other viewers in the chat. Let us know where you are from and whether you're a new or longtime viewer. We'll see you live soon! Thanks again for joining us for Live with Annie. We are so happy to have you with us today. While you wait for the program to start, we hope you'll enjoy the content playing on screen. There's so much inspiration, so take a moment to tell us what you love in the chat. Don't forget there is a countdown clock on the screen so you know how long until we go live. Hi, it's Annie again, reminding you that we'll be going live with this week's episode shortly. There is a countdown clock on the screen showing how much time is left. You've got just enough time to grab some water or a beverage of your choice and a snack, and to connect with us in the chat. We'd love to hear what you've been working on this week. back to remind you that we'll be starting this week's live very shortly. We've got a really fun episode planned for today, and we'll see you soon. Hi, I'm Annie of ByAnnie.com and Patterns by Annie. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 2 of season 5 of Live with Annie. Today we are focusing on foundation paper piecing, or FPP, and you are invited to sew along. We will talk about ways to use FPP, talk about techniques, and work together on a border for Piecekeeper. We have got lots of tips and tricks to share, so stay tuned. Wow, has it really been a whole month since we were last together? In some ways it seems like forever, and in other ways it seems like we were just here. I have had a very productive month with one pattern completely tested and video scripts in process, another pattern almost through the testing phase, and a third pattern about ready to be in-house tested as we speak. We are working really hard to have everything ready to ship to distributors and local quilt shops well before we announce the patterns at H&H in Chicago. So wish us luck. I hope that you have had a productive month too. Drop a comment in the chat to let us know what you've been working on. We always love hearing from you. That's the place too to put any questions you might have as we go through today's episode. Just add them there and we will do our best to answer them before we close. And also, please take a moment to follow us wherever you are watching. And if you know someone else who you think might enjoy the information that we share, we would really be grateful if you would tell them about Live with Annie too. Just tag them while you're watching, as that will take them directly to the episode so they can watch it too. In our last episode, we talked about the expansion of our Sew Pink campaign to help spread awareness of cancer throughout the year. We shared a great new tool we've developed for choosing solid colored fabrics and showed some fun petit-four baskets that we made using teal and white, the colors for cervical cancer. If you missed that episode or want to watch it again, remember that you can find all the previous 184 episodes of Live with Annie on our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, or at ByAnnie.com. And Jake's put up all the links to make them easy for you to find. Time for a drink. So February is National Cancer Prevention Month, and it is a really great time to wear a variety of colored ribbons to support all the different forms of cancer. To help you learn ways to potentially reduce your risk of cancer, we have compiled a list of the 12 most studied, known, or suspected risk factors for cancer, as determined by the National Cancer Institute. These include some things that we can't do much to change, like age or past exposure to chemicals. But they also include things we can influence, things such as diet, exposure to sunlight, alcohol consumption, and tobacco use. So be sure to visit the ByAnnie blog to learn more about these risk factors and ways that you can reduce the risks. Since our language is sewing, we thought it would be fun this month to help build awareness by making some projects using a rainbow of colors representing many common cancers. And since so many of you indicated that you'd love a lesson in foundation paper piecing, we thought we'd combine the two and design an FPP pattern. As always, that turned out to be a bit more complicated than I expected. Let's just say it's a good thing I had a whole month to play with ideas and pick a project. In the end, I designed a pattern for a simple flying geese border that's sized to fit on a Piecekeeper bag. Piecekeeper is part of our ByAnnie Basics series of patterns, and it is a really great way to learn some basic ByAnnie techniques. As you make this handy project bag, you'll learn to quilt with soft and stable, make a simple interfaced handle, install a zipper in a mesh pocket, add a border, round corners, and make and attach bindings. The pattern is free, and we have filmed a full step-by-step video tutorial to accompany it. You will find the downloadable pattern and video series at ByAnnie.com. Just search for ByAnnie Basics or Piecekeeper, and note that's P-I-E-C-E, not P-E-A-C-E. All right, one more drink before we get started. So I'm going to start today with just a brief explanation of what foundation paper piecing, or FPP, is and why you might want to use it in your projects. I will show a few ByAnnie projects that incorporate FPP and show ways that we've added FPP to other ByAnnie projects too. Then we'll sew. I'll share tips for preparing the pattern and sewing the border block, and we will work together to make one unit. Once you've got an idea of how the process works, then I'm going to talk about considerations for adapting this pattern for ByAnnie projects, talk about what you need to consider when choosing a block, share tips for sizing and cutting fabrics, and share tips for more complicated blocks. So let's get started. All right, so what is foundation paper piecing? FPP is a precision piecing technique that involves sewing fabrics to a paper foundation using the sewing machine. You can make really incredible accurate quilt blocks using odd angles, very small pieces, and things that would be really hard to do with traditional piecing techniques. I have to admit that I am not an extremely accurate piecer, so when I discovered FPP, I was really thrilled. It took away so much angst and made patchwork pieces that fit together a breeze. You may have heard of EPP as well. Let me find my EPP blocks here, and wondered how EPP compares to FPP. Well, FPP stands for Foundation Paper Piecing. EPP stands for English Paper Piecing. It too involves using a paper foundation, and it enables you to make some complex patterns. But generally, EPP is a hand sewing technique where you wrap your fabric pieces around a paper foundation, and then they're pre-cut shapes, generally hexagons or other geometric forms, and then you take those forms and stitch them together, again, usually by hand, to create intricate designs. In both FPP and EPP, the paper templates are removed once the fabric is sewn in place or the project is assembled. So when I started writing patterns, I was working really closely with Heather at Superior Threads and doing shows with them. Heather was a really prolific and accurate and beautiful piecer, and she always found amazing people to quilt her quilts and showcase their beautiful threads. So Heather and I designed a lot of quilts together, and many of them featured blocks made using foundation paper piecing. Because we moved more to bag and purse patterns, and because I didn't have models of the quilts to go with the patterns, we have discontinued most of those quilt patterns over the years. We do, however, still sell patterns for two of my favorite quilts, Air Show 2 and Feeling Crabby. And I'm just going to quickly show you those and talk a little bit about how they work. So Feeling Crabby, actually you can see behind me on this set. Here's another one that we can look at a little bit more close up. And Feeling Crabby is made with two foundation paper pieced blocks. So one of them makes the waves, the other one makes the crab shells. And on the crab shells, we actually added some texture magic to give them some real texture. Air Show is a quilt that features airplane blocks. And we've got one block that's kind of flying to the side, and then another, where's the straight one here? Another more straight one that is a little easier to piece. So on each of these quilts, the blocks are made using FPP, and then they're joined together to make the quilt top. As you can see, I've got really perfect angles and points all the way through here, and that wouldn't have been as easy if I had tried to do this with foundation or traditional piecing methods. Another way that you can incorporate FPP into a project is by using it for a border, which is what I have done on these bags. So our Piecekeeper pattern features a border at the bottom of the mesh pocket, and it is a perfect place for this FPP border. There are some things to think about as you decide on the size though, which I learned as I worked, and we will talk more about those later. But we've got lots of patterns that use borders, and this pattern or others could be easily adapted to those. So for instance, I'm just gonna get rid of these quilts out of my way. Here's our pattern eye cases, and you could easily take this border and maybe make it a little bit bigger, or maybe make it a little bit longer, add a few more geese, and make a nice border to go on the front of eye cases. You could do it on our sewing machine cover under cover, just by adding it across the top. Or take a stand, or undercut, or running with scissors. Any of those patterns that use borders you could easily adapt an FPP border to go on there. It's also perfect for making a block for a project. So here is a fun on-the-go 2.0 that I made using a pineapple block. And I designed this block when thinking about options for today, thinking it would be perfect on the front of an on-the-go or another project with a small pocket too. And let me show you too. I have these two pockets, which are ready to, well, not ready yet, but getting ready. So this is a pocket that I also designed to go on the front of a block. And then on the back pattern of that thing, I thought I could add another one going across. And these are made using adaptations of the flying geese border that we'll be working on today. So we'll talk more later about how I changed these and how to determine the size when you want to incorporate FPP into a project. So another pattern that we have that we recently introduced is our two big totes pattern. And we designed this one to have two large pockets on each side. So on the large one, the pockets are 9-inch square. The extra large has 12-inch square blocks. So just as I added raw edged applique to enhance the pockets on this block, or on this purse, you could also take an FPP block and really add some interest to those areas. So now that you've seen some ways that you can incorporate FPP into your projects, let's make a block. But while I get ready to do that, we are going to take a little break so that Elisa can tell you about our local quilt shop contest. We launched our 8th annual contest on Saturday, January 25th, and things are really going strong. You can go up, Glow. We've got some new sponsors, we've got some new prizes this year. Voting is stronger than ever, so I'm going to let Elisa tell you a little bit more while I get ready to sew.
Hi, I'm Elisa with ByAnnie.com and Patterns by Annie. We're excited to announce that voting in our 8th annual Local Quilt Shop Contest will begin on Local Quilt Shop Day, Saturday, January 25th, and run through February 28th, 2025. We started the Local Quilt Shop Contest in 2018 as a way to highlight the backbone of the sewing community, local quilt shops. Since then, each year has brought new and exciting changes to the contest. We started the contest with 1 grand prize winner and 2 honorable mentions. Slowly, we began adding more categories like runner-up until 2022, when in an effort to recognize even more amazing shops, we began awarding regional prizes, expanding our total winners to 75 in 2024. This year, we've added another completely new category with a very special prize. We love seeing stores show their competitive side for the contest, and it's fun to see the creative ways that they get out the vote. But there are still many incredible stores that don't get the opportunity to share in the spotlight. So this year, we're introducing the Creative Hub Award. The Creative Hub Award will be given to 3 stores who have gone above and beyond in finding ways to foster creativity and community for their customers. Each of these stores will receive a live virtual presentation with Annie for their store. The winning stores will work with Annie personally to create a truly special virtual event for their customers. This can be a lecture, class, or whatever each store thinks would most interest and inspire their community. To help make this event fully interactive, winners of the Creative Hub Award will also receive a free trunk show to accompany the presentation. Unlike the grand and regional prizes, this will be awarded based on the quality and content of voters' comments instead of the quantity of votes received. By taking the extra time to write out thoughtful comments and by encouraging your friends to vote, you are directly helping your store's chances of winning an award, even if there are bigger stores in your region. This leads me to a new rule we've added this year, but before you panic, this new rule also comes with a new prize. In order to qualify for any award or prize in the 2025 Local Quilt Shop Contest, stores will now need to receive at least 50 votes. This includes the new Creative Hub Award. The competition is ramping up this year, and we want to make sure our rules reflect that. The other reason we've decided to add this new rule is because in addition to providing free trunk shows to our regional winners, our 2025 regional winners will also receive $500 USD of ByAnnie credit. While a free trunk show might not appeal to every store, what store can't use $500 of free product? And that's not all. Thanks to our generous, returning, and new sponsors, there are lots of other great prizes. So be sure to check out the full list of rules and prizes on our website, LQScontest.com. Ready to start collecting votes? Looking for ways to share the contest with your friends? The LQS Contest website has great resources to promote the contest and get your store those votes. Like these cute thermometers that you can fill up throughout the contest as you receive votes. Whether your goal is 50 votes, 100 votes, or if you want to fill in your specific store's goal, these are a great way to show customers your progress. We have plenty of fun decorations you can put around your store to promote the contest, as well as a press release template you can submit to your local news outlet. And for customers, we have great digital resources you can post to show you voted. These can all be found on the Promote page of our website. We'll have more updates throughout the contest, so be sure to stay connected through our email newsletter, our social media pages, and through the LQS Contest website. And if you're watching after January 25th and you haven't done so already, go vote for your favorite shop! We've attached a link to the voting page in the description as well as in the pinned comment. We're so excited for this year's contest and hope that it continues to be a great resource for local quilt shops. Good luck to all the amazing local quilt shops out there, and until next time, happy stitching!
We have really been thrilled with the support shown to local quilt shops already in the contest. With voting open for just 11 days, as of this morning, over 1,600 stores in 14 countries had received almost 24,000 votes. I bet it's up over that by now. And we still have over 3 weeks of voting open. It has really been fun to see Farm Girl Quilting in Florida and Cali Quilt Co. in California duking it out for the grand prize spot. Both stores have been in the lead since the beginning of the contest, and they are really pulling out the stops. Each has over 600 votes already, which is 4 to 5 times more than they got in last year's contest. In just the past couple of days, last year's grand prize winner, Serendipitous, moved to the top of the leaderboard, so she is sure to give them a run for their money. And the Old Country Store in Pennsylvania, our grand prize winner in 2020, is steadily moving up the list too. Stores can only be grand prize winner once, so neither of those stores can take the big prize, but it is always fun to see how their loyal customers continue to give them strong support. That really says a lot about how the stores continue to inspire and motivate them. Remember, this contest is a marathon, not a sprint, so there is still lots of time to make things happen. Who knows who will be in the grand prize spot when the dust settles? Please get out and vote for your favorite shop if you haven't already, and remind your family and friends to vote too. All right, let's get back to FPPing. Before we start sewing, let's take a minute to talk about the tools that you will need. First, a sewing machine, an iron, a rotary cutter and mat, and some rulers. I like to use just a general quilter's ruler. A 6x6 and a 6x12 are good sizes for this project. You're also going to want and add a quarter ruler. This is essential, I think, to making this technique easy. And an add a quarter ruler has just a little lip on the side that makes it easy to hold it in place in the right space and trim a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I also really like using a little graph ruler, such as this one made by See-Through Ruler. This is a really thin ruler, and it has a 1/4 inch grid printed on it. Some people use a heavy paper, such as a bookmark, for the folding step, but I really prefer the sturdiness of the plastic ruler, plus I like having the grid lines. But if you don't have a see-through ruler, grab yourself a bookmark or heavy piece of cardstock, a postcard, and that will work too. You're also going to want some scissors, and both paper scissors, and I like little snippers for snipping my thread, and I like having a washable glue stick, or some double-sided basting tape. And I learned as I worked this time that I really prefer basting tape because it's easier to remove and it doesn't leave a mark. I often will use these purple glue sticks, and if I'm a little overzealous or too much comes out, they can be really noticeable, especially on light fabrics. All right, next let's talk about setting up your machine. I recommend using an open toe 1/4 inch foot. You want to really be able to see where you're sewing, so having an open toe foot lets you see the needle, and you can make sure you're staying on the line as you sew. I've got a 90-14 top stitch needle, and I'm setting my stitch length to 1.5, which I'm going to do right now before I forget it. So that's a really small stitch. Having a large needle and a small stitch really helps to perforate the paper. It also strengthens the stitching because you're doing more stitches per inch, and having the paper perforate it makes it much easier to remove it when the block is complete. I'm using a 50 weight polyester thread. That's a fairly fine thread, and that thread weight can really affect the accuracy of your paper piecing, so a thin thread like a 50 weight thread works really well. For the flying geese border that we're making today, you're going to need a variety of fabrics as well. I am using some solid fabrics. I picked some from Andover Fabrics and Island Boutique. I combined them because I wanted a full rainbow of geese, but you could use printed fabrics too. I would recommend that you avoid directional fabrics until you know what you're doing. Pieces are positioned at all sorts of angles, and trying to align a directional fabric can take some real thought. So follow the directions in the pattern to cut the pieces for the geese, as well as the background and borders. And we'll talk more later about how to measure if you don't have measurements like I gave you. So for this project, you are going to cut 15 triangles for the geese. And the pattern assumes that you'll be making each goose a different color. So it instructed you to cut 15 2.5 inch squares, each of which you cut in half diagonally. That means you're going to have 15 geese left over for another border. If you're not using that much variety, you can get by with 8 2.5-inch squares. That would yield enough pieces for 16 geese. You're also going to need some pieces of the background, for the backgrounds of the geese, the end pieces, and the borders. And the borders are added to bring the block to the right size for the project and also avoid cutting off the geese. So cut all of those according to the pattern instructions that is available to download at our website. Though I really prefer that black border that I did on that bag, today I'm going to use a light gray blue to make it easy for you to see the stitching lines. And I really found it interesting to see how the look of a border changes just by changing the color that I used on the background. Once you have all the pieces cut, then lay them out in an order that is pleasing and stack them up in order so that the last piece, or the first one you want to attach, is at the top. So I laid all my colors out in this arrangement to match this bag, and we're going to start on that end of the border, so I'm working my way this way. Then you're going to need to prepare your pattern. So you're going to need to make a copy of the Flying Geese Border FPP pattern, which is on the second page of the PDF. This block is divided into 3 sections so that we could fit it on an 8.5 by 11 inch page. And you will need one of each of these sections to make the full border. You can just print this on standard copy paper. I have tried lots of special papers over the years, things like parchment paper and newsprint, but truly I find that regular old copy paper works just as well, and I always have it available. And sometimes I'm copying big 11 by 17 inch sheets, which are really hard to find in those specialty papers, so just using regular copy paper I like. One really important thing, double check when you're printing to make sure that your printer is set to print at 100%. There is a 1-inch square on the pattern so you can measure to make sure. A lot of times your printer defaults to fit to page, and when you go to measure your pieces, they're not going to measure right. So if you've got 100%, this will measure an inch square. These will each be 6 inches from the dark line to the dark line, and this one will be 5 inches. And that way, one thing that I do if I'm doing a lot of the same block, I will make all those paper patterns copies at the same time. That way I'm sure they're all the same size and I'm not going to have to worry about setting up the machine again. All right, once you have that done, then you're going to cut out each section of the pattern, leaving a margin around the lighter line at the outside. So for this, I'm going to use my paper scissors, and I'm just going to kind of go right down the middle along those 2 lines. I hope all of you got the message about getting your fabrics cut and that you're prepared for today and ready to go, and you're sewing along with me. So I'm anxious to see what you make, and if you've got any questions as you go, be sure and put them in the chat. All right, so we've got our 3 sections labeled, and you'll notice that this one has all the pieces are a C, this is B, and this is A. We're going to start with A, but when you sew these together, they will go together like this. There are 5 main steps to the FPP process, and these will be repeated over and over, so you kind of want to make this your mantra. And they are fold, position fabric, stitch, press, and trim. So we're going to start with folding. And so the next step is folding the pattern along the stitching lines. This is not a step that I've seen many other people use, but it's how I learned to prepare the pattern when I learned to do FPP over 20 years ago, and I think it makes a huge difference in making this process easy. And this is where I like using this little see-through ruler. So just position it along each of the dark lines on the pattern and fold the paper over that. I call this the seam fold line. So on this piece, I'm just going to fold along all the horizontal lines first. You do not need to do it on the outer borders because you're not going to be sewing out there, so just on the ones where you're going to be sewing. So I'm going to do all the horizontal lines first, and I just take my ruler, align it on the line, and then fold the paper over and use my finger to crease it. This is a perfect little project to do when you're getting ready to do an FPP project while you're sitting and watching TV one night. I'm working on a pineapple quilt, and I've got, I don't know, 70 some blocks to do. And so over Christmas, I took all those blocks and folded them as I went. So I've done all the horizontal lines. Now I'm going to do the vertical lines, and I like doing those one side at a time too. So again, I'm lining my ruler right along that line. And can you see it? Can you see it now, Glo? These lines are going to be helpful when it comes time to trim the seam allowances, and doing them all at once before you start sewing to me just makes sense and makes it so much easier. I don't have to stop and do it later. And when there's fabric in the way, it makes it harder too. So again, I'm folding all along there. All right. On a more complex pattern, rather than doing all the vertical and all that, I would probably follow the numbers of the pieces so that I didn't miss any, but on this, it's easy to just do all of those at once. We are going to make one more set of folds, and this one is you only have to do on one piece. This isn't a normal FPP technique that I've seen, but again, I learned it when I learned to do it, and I find that it really makes aligning the first pieces super easy. So after this is going to be the first piece on this one, I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to align the 1/4 inch mark along that first seam line, and I'm going to fold over on that piece. I'm going to fold this one on here too. On here, my very first piece has diagonal lines, so I'm going to fold each of those. And then I'm going to fold the 1/4 inch out. This kind of eliminates the need for a light box or a light window. A lot of times I'm doing paper piecing in the middle of the night, and by having these lines folded on here, I know where that first piece has to align because I've got those fold lines, and it makes it easier to line things up. So I call this one the seam allowance fold. So the first one is the seam fold line. This is the seam allowance fold. And so on sections B and C both, we're going to do those extra lines on both sides of those pieces. So one thing to mention before we position our fabric in place, go ahead and go down, Glo, is that you will position the fabric right side up on the back side of the pattern. So your fabric is going to be on this side of the pattern. You're going to be sewing on the printed side. So basically what ends up happening is that you create a mirror image of the pattern that is printed. On a symmetrical pattern like this, you really aren't going to notice it, but on something like the airplane or the crab, it's going to be facing the other way. So that's just something to keep in mind that might be a little bit confusing. All right, we are ready to position our first piece and start sewing. So we're working first with section A, and the first piece that we attached is number A1. You always do them in order, and that is one of the 1 3/4 by 3 inch end rectangles that we cut. So I'm working with a solid fabric today. There isn't a right or wrong side, so if you're brand new to this, using a solid fabric or a batik that doesn't really have a right or wrong side is an easy way to avoid mistakes. It may not be the best way to learn the process because you might not realize it, but mine won't have a right or wrong side. But let's say this is the right side. I'm going to put it up. I'm going to position it on the back, and you can see I'm aligning it on that top seam fold line or seam allowance fold line that I put in there. I'm going to let it overhang each side evenly, and that's where I want it to do. Make it lower so you can see it. Okay, so what I've done is I've folded the pattern along that seam allowance fold line, and I'm going to take this piece and position it right along that fold line so that it covers that piece. And then I'm going to either use some glue from a glue stick, or as I said, I like basting tape a little bit better to hold that piece in place. So just a little bit, 1/2 inch or so of basting tape right in the middle of that piece is plenty, or a little swish of glue. If you are using a glue stick, put the glue on the paper, not the fabric. It makes it easier to pull the fabric away later. It doesn't get all in the threads of the fabric. So again, I've got that there, and I'm aligning that piece up so that it's even with that fold line that I pressed. So now I've got my first piece in place, and I'm ready to put my first goose on so that I can line pieces up. And actually these are set for another block. These are the ones I'm going to work with for block A. So the first one I'm going to do is this little lime green one, and I'm just going to align it, can't do that up in the air, so that the long edge matches the other one and it overhangs fairly evenly on each side. So I've got that position in place, and then we're going to fold this over and stitch. Let me, Glow, you need to go down, go down, go down. So again, this piece is right side down, so you can't tell that, but that's the right side, so right sides are together, and I've got this overhanging evenly on each side and centered. I cut these triangles oversized, so there's a little wiggle room if the piece isn't exactly centered. And if you want, you can fold it up along the projected seam line and see that it's going to easily cover the piece that you're trying to cover. We're going to talk later about how I determined the size for all these pieces so that when you get ready to do a different pattern, you kind of know how to do that. All right, I need a drink. Now we're ready to stitch these two pieces together. So I'm just going to use my fingers to hold the fabric in place, and I'm going to turn this over, which exposes the printed side of the pattern. And then I'm going to begin and end about 1/4 inch beyond this stitching line, and I'm going to sew all the way across this solid line between piece A1 and piece A2. So I'm actually going to start way out here off the border, and I'm just going to eyeball that line all the way across to the other side. When I started this, I had some patterns that actually had those seam lines marked on them that extended out. If that would be helpful for you, that's certainly something you can do. Can you go down, Glow? All right, so then I'm just going to sew all the way across that. I haven't sewn standing up in a while, so let's see how I do. And again, we've got our stitch length set really low at 1.5. The beauty of this is you're sewing right on that line, so it's easy to get it accurate. All right. Then we can turn this, oh, I should have turned my iron on before I started. Forgot about that. But then I'm going to turn this over and press it up so that it covers shape A2 on the pattern. And I'm going to press it. I have seen people who just finger press the fabric over or use a pressing tool or a roller to do that. Personally, I really prefer to use an iron. So I just keep my small iron handy for this step. My tech editor, Leslie, recommends using a dry iron without any steam so that you don't distort your paper pattern. I have to confess, I've used steam a lot of times. I've really never seen any ill effects, but that's always good advice. Leslie can always be counted on for things that I don't think of. All right, so we've got that piece pressed in place, and now we are ready for another really important step. As I said earlier, we cut these pieces for the shapes a little bit oversized, and not much on these geese, more on the backgrounds. So before we add the next piece, we need to trim this piece to the proper size. And this is where you want the add 1/4 ruler, because it makes this super easy and safe. You're not worried about cutting something that you don't want or having it slip on you. So turn the piece over so that the printed side is up, and now we're going to fold along each of these diagonal edges and then trim away. And you're going to have to pull your stitching out a little bit on this side in order to do that. So I just pull until it gets to there, and then I fold my pattern over along the line that I folded. You're going to see the fabric from my goose peeking out below, and this thick edge of the add 1/4 ruler enables me to just take the ruler and butt it right up against that folded edge of the fabric. It's not going to move, it's going to stop there, and it's really held in place. So then I can just take my ruler rotary cutter and trim that little bit of excess fabrics that's there. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to tear that away, butt my ruler up against that, and trim. You could do this with a regular ruler, but this little thing makes it so much quicker and easier and prevents ruler slippage, so it's a really good investment. All right, so now we've got our first goose, we're ready to go, and now we're just going to follow the pattern numbers in order. So we've done A1, A2, the next is A3. A3 and A4 you could do in either order, it doesn't really matter. On this one, I'm gonna start with A3, which is here. So on here, you're going to take one of those background triangles that you cut, and you're going to take the long edge of it and align it on here, kind of centering it. We've got lots of wiggle room on this piece, so I'm positioning it like that. Keep it down. I'm not going to pin it. So now I'm ready to sew this one. So I've got it aligned in there. Let me show you this actually though before I go. I'm going to grab a pencil here. I'll use this friction pen. Yeah. I use my great big school pencil. So on this one, when I'm ready to sew this, I'm going to start out here. I'm going to use my little ruler to make me a line. This is such a big pencil. Who knows where that line's going to fall up. But that's your seam line. So you want to start off your piece and go at least 1/4 inch beyond and sew that all the way across there. So again, I've got that held in place. I don't need to pin it or do anything. It's not that hard to hold those together. And then I'm just going to sew again along the line and extending the line each direction. So you can see I've got my stitching going from there all the way across. And now I can take this piece and fold it up and press. And I don't bother to trim that one until I have my next background triangle attached. So this one, I'm going to align it like that, right along that edge again. I've already trimmed my goose, so I know it's going to be right. And we'll sew that one in place. This time I'm just going to eyeball that stitching line. All right, so our second one's in place. We're going to press it up. And I've got both of those in place. And now I'm going to align this next piece. To do that, I need to pull my pattern away a little bit from the stitching so that I can fold on this line where I had folded the seam line there. So I want to get that nice and flat. And you can see I've got a lot more excess here. But to me, that made it a lot easier. So now I'm going to take my add 1/4 ruler, butt it against that fold line, trim that off, and now I'm ready to add the next goose. Oops, it looks like I got 2 of the same color in here. I only need 1 of those. All right, so this time I'm going to align this right across there, again trying to keep it fairly well centered, and I'm ready to sew that. Can you go down a little bit, Glow, so I can see what, if I'm missing anything I want it to say? Keep going down. Keep going. All right. All right, so now that goose is in place. We're going to press it up. And in a minute here, you're going to see that having a few pieces in here makes it a lot easier to position pieces. Again, I'm going to fold that, or tear that open, fold that over, trim this. Part of the reason I decided to do this block is I felt that by the time you did the same thing 15 times, it would sink in. and you'd understand the process really well, where if you're doing a more complicated block that has all different shapes, each one is different and you don't repeat it often enough to know. So hopefully that works. All right, we've got our goose trimmed. Now we're ready to attach our background piece. And you'll notice that when I've got this laying down, this is the piece that's on the left, but when I go to sew, I'm sewing along the line on the right. So pay attention to that. That mirror imaging makes a difference. Also, as you start going, if you take the point of this triangle and align it right along that line, you'll know you've got it in good position, and that makes it super easy to line those pieces up. And those are things that you just learn kind of as you work on a project. I don't know that you could really figure that out for odd shapes as easily. But we're going to talk about tips for placing pieces that are unusual too. That's coming. I wanted you to understand the process before we went into all of that. All right, now we're ready to do this next piece. Again, I'm going to align that point there, match my edges here, and sew across this. The thing to remember is always flip it over so that you're sewing where the lines are, which is kind of a no-brainer because you don't know where to sew. But I have to admit that last night as I was preparing for today, at one point I had my two pieces lined up with my 1/4 inch seam and I started to sew, and then it was like, wait a minute, this is not how this works. So I learned that it's really not that hard to take stitches out when you've got your thing set at 1.5. I thought it'd be a lot harder, but it was pretty easy. All right, now we're going to trim along this line. We've added this piece and these two. Now we're ready to attach this piece, so we need to trim the seam allowance on here. So again, we're going to pull that out a little bit so that we can fold on that line that we folded originally, and then trim. And we're ready to attach our dark green one. Dark green is the color for liver cancer. And one of my good friends, Linda, who lives in Texas and always helps us at shows, was recently diagnosed with liver cancer. And she wanted people to know to really make sure that if their doctor wants to do tests, not to ignore them, because something hadn't looked right and she almost didn't go do the test because she didn't really think it was necessary. And they determined that she had cancer. So don't ignore things. All right, so we've got now our third goose on. What's our next step? Yep, trim. So we're going to fold along the lines that we folded earlier. Trim that. You can see I don't have very much to trim away on these geese. And if by chance I didn't have that positioned that there was a full 1/4 inch there, that wouldn't really matter because you're sewing on the lines so that so long as you've got some seam allowance there, you'd probably be okay. All right, add our next background. Can you imagine trying to piece this just with pieces that you cut and trying to get it and get all those angles to come up so easily? I know mine would not be nearly as perfect as this, so this is why I love FPP. You'll notice that I go pretty far past those lines of stitching. I don't want to worry about any of that stitching coming out, and so I make sure I got a good line of stitching there. I think that tearing it away from the seam also makes it easier when I go to pull the paper away at the end, because some of the parts are already removed from the paper. All right, ready for my next goose. I only have 2 geese left to do. So you notice we're following the same techniques. We're trimming, we're sewing, stitching, we're pressing, and then we're starting over again. Trim. And you want to trim on any side that is affected by the next piece. We're doing both of these at once because we can. On another pattern, you might only be able to do one edge at a time. All right. Positioning our piece, again, aligning it along that line. We're ready to stitch. Press. Sewing our second one on here because we can. Normally you'd only do one at a time. Trim. And our last goose is ready to go on. So line those edges, pinch it in place, stitch from side to side across the seam line. Press that piece up. All right, and we can add our last 2 backgrounds. How's everybody coming? Are you keeping up with me? After I finish this, we're going to talk about trimming it, and then I'm going to talk about some other techniques. So if you want to keep working on your others while I do, or if you want to listen and come back and finish it, either way works. You can pause it, that's right. So leave a comment and let me know what fabric you picked. Did you do solids or did you pick some Tula Pink? I'm curious to see what everyone uses for their borders. All right, so we've got all of our pieces attached, and this doesn't look like much, but our last step is going to be to trim the block and leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance around all the sides. So there is a light line there, and you could trim to that line, but I don't recommend doing that. I recommend getting your ruler, aligning the 1/4 inch mark on the dark line here, and trimming to that. Like I said, it should fall out on that outer line, but if you use a ruler, you're going to get the best accuracy. So I'm going to take the 1/4 inch line on my ruler, align it right along that dark line, and then just trim along this side. Trim along that side, and you can see there's a little bit of paper showing on the outside, so I think my ruler moved a little bit on that one. Not much, but a little. All right, so there we have it. Our Unit A is ready to go. You are going to follow exactly those same steps to make Units B and C. In order to keep this episode to a reasonable length, I've already completed these units, so we can talk about joining the sections. But before I move on, let me talk to you real quick. Remember how we folded the pattern here? I just wanted to show you when you're ready to do that goose, just make sure that rather than being on the bottom seam lines that we folded, you're up on those seam allowance fold lines when you go to align that piece. Hold it in place with a little bit of basting tape, and then you're ready to join your pieces just like you did before. All right, I am going to trim this one really quick because I was going to practice that this morning to make sure we had our cameras set up right, and we were so busy with a million other things that it didn't happen, so I'll do it right now. We have been having fun filming reels and things. Wow, that didn't work at all. For announcing, or for the local quilt shop contest. So you got to make sure you're following us on Instagram and on YouTube to see them, because we did a really fun one this morning. Elisa has lots of fun ideas. All right, so here's my set B ready to go. I'm going to attach it here. When you attach them, make sure that your geese are all going the right way, although if you wanted them to fly together, that's certainly an option. The really great thing about this pattern is there's lots of flexibility for how you put things together. But let's talk about how to join the sections to make the full block. I usually leave the paper in place when I do this so that I can line things up exactly. And we're going to take B goes here, so that, whoops, right sides together. This is what I want it to look like when I'm done. So just make sure you've got B1 going to A15 and 16. So whatever the largest number on the last section goes to the smallest number on the new section. And I'm going to put those together, and I'm going to do some little wonder clips to hold them in place. But then I'm also going to double check with some pins, because I really want to make sure those corners are aligned well. So the nice thing about leaving the paper in is it makes them really stiff and easy to line up. The pins might be unnecessary, but on another block it might be more necessary, so I want to show you how to do it. So I'm going to get a pin, and I'm going to go right down at the corner of this block. I'm going to go straight down, and see, that didn't come out where it needed to. So I'm going to reposition that so that that comes out right at the corner of that block. And then actually I don't even pin it, I just kind of leave it there straight up and down, and I reclip. Again, go down here, see if I do better this time. That one could be adjusted a tiny bit up too. That looks good. That one's there and ready to go. Clip that in place, and then I'm just going to sew across the line. Again, this is awesome because I don't have to worry about an accurate 1/4 inch seam. I just sew along the line, which gives me an accurate 1/4 inch seam because that's exactly where we trimmed it. And I would go ahead and backstitch here on each corner. All right, So we've got our 2 units sewn together. We've got our really nice point right at the top of that goose, and it's ready to go. So then you can press that seam. It seems to want to go towards the goose up here, so that's the way I'd press it. But I would probably remove the paper, at least the one underneath the seam at this point, and I'm going to leave the other paper in until I get my whole block assembled. So to remove the paper, you can just tear it along that seam line. You can see it comes off really easily. Little corner ones are a little bit more to grab, but those come out really easily. And we may as well tear this one out too right away. I've seen people use wash-away paper for this. But that gets a lot more expensive, and really this isn't that hard to pull out. If you have some tweezers, those are helpful for pulling some of those little pieces out. Then I'm going to press that seam towards the dark blue, and it's ready to go. Then I would add my other piece on top, and then we can finish our block. So one thing that when I designed this border or this block, you may wonder why you cut these big border pieces, and I'm going to explain why. So I am not going to go through the whole process of attaching that, but basically I'm going to leave my paper in this whole block. I'm going to position my border on the back. It will fit exactly to the end. I'm going to clip it in place, and then I'm going to stitch along this line on this side again so that I have a nice border there. And then that will be ready. The reason why I did that, and Glow, you can go down a ways. You saw how to remove the paper, then your border is going to be finished. So I need a drink of water. The next thing I want to talk about is how to adapt a block to fit a pattern, or adapt a pattern to fit a block. So as I said earlier, we designed this block to be used on Piecekeeper, and this is the first one that I made. That pattern instructs you to cut a border that measures 3 inches high and 17 inches wide. The 17 inch on the sides allows a little extra so it fits the mesh, and then that trims down to 16 inches. So when I designed the first block for this project, I sized the border to be 2.5 inches high and 16 inches wide, figuring that I'd have a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all sides to bring me to that 3 by 16.5, but that's what it would be once I had my mesh pocket trimmed. What I didn't consider was the fact that we round the corners and bind the outer edges, both of which cut into that border. So you can see I mostly kept the goose on this side, but I did lose a little bit of its point. And on this side, I lost a good part of that goose. And then I had to add a border at the top to get it to fit. So at that point, I went back to the drawing board and changed a number of things for the block. So first of all, I added borders at the top and bottom, as well as the sides, so that I could accommodate the bindings and the roundings. I also changed the number of geese from 15. Originally I had 12 to get them to fit better, because when you do a goose, if you can have the width be twice the height, so these geese are all 1 inch high and 2 inches wide, that makes them fit better and also makes this a much more versatile pattern. So in order to keep the geese at a reasonable size and have similarly sized borders at the top and bottom, this border now measures 3.5 inches tall by 17 inches wide. So to make it fit the Piecekeeper bag, you'll need to make some adjustments. So here's a couple of options. You can trim the mesh pocket to be 1/2 inch shorter. So, and the pattern for today explains that. Just go to step 2C1C and cut it 8 inches high instead of 8.5 inches high. Or you can do what I did here, and I just cut my quilted fabric 11.5 inches high instead of 11. I had plenty of quilted fabric once I did that, so I just made my bag 1/2 inch taller, and that worked really well. The other change, and I didn't remember this or didn't realize it when I wrote the pattern last week, so make a note in your pattern, is that there's a lining that goes underneath this border to cover all those raw edges on the inside. That also needs to be cut at 3.5 by 17 rather than just 3 by 17. So add that to your note. But other than those modifications, you're going to follow the Piecekeeper pattern just as it's written. And I would love to see some Piecekeeper bags with some pretty flying geese blocks on them, so be sure to enter those in our monthly photo contest. As I said earlier, I also adapted the pattern to make some pockets for an on-the-go bag. And so what I did is I took the 3 parts of the pattern, and I thought it would be interesting to have them offset a little bit. So what I did is I took this block pattern, let's say, and I did, or let's do this one. I did the border at the bottom, and then I did just 4 geese, and I stopped there, and once I had my 2 pieces together, I added borders all the way around to make it fit to be the right size. And then I did one where I had 6 geese, and I will fit that on the back pocket. The back pocket is cut 6.5 inches wide, which is exactly what this finishes or trims to, so that will work really well. And what I had to do there, because I had 6 geese on there and these only have 5, I just found the midpoint of this line and drew diagonal lines and then pieced an extra goose in that last unit. So you can see you can take a pattern and use it for other things besides what it's designed for. So again, I added some borders on this to make it about 6.5 inches wide, and that gave me a little bit of wiggle room for shrinkage when I was quilting. Once I had the block quilted, I trimmed it to the 5 3/4 by 5 3/4 size as the pattern directs, and then I can incorporate it in my on-the-go just as the pattern directs. For this block, or for this on-the-go, I pieced a pineapple block for the front pocket. And if you want to use a particular block for your project, here are some tips. So for this project, the pattern directs you to cut a 5 3/4 inch square from quilted fabric for this pocket. I usually add a little bit extra to that so that I can trim it to size after it's been quilted, because you are going to get a little bit of shrinkage. Not much on a block of this size, but it depends on how much you quilt. So for this pocket, I added 1/2 inch, so I started with a 6 1/4 inch square. Not knowing exactly how much shrinkage I was going to get, I made sure that the last round of these pieces extended 1/2 inch or so beyond the outer edges of the pattern, so kind of like this. I made sure that it extended plenty beyond there so that I'd have a little wiggle room if I needed it. The other thing that I did is I made sure that I picked a block that didn't have points extending all the way to the edge. So if I trimmed away a little more or a little less, it wasn't going to be as obvious as what happened on here when I had to trim away the point of my goose. So keep in mind too that your binding folds over to the front, and it's usually you're sewing with a 1/4 inch seam, but you have a little more, so you want to allow enough extra there for that too. All right, I'm going to turn this iron off before I burn myself on it. I'm going to grab a drink of water, and we're going to talk next about how to determine sizes to cut. This guy back over here. Get rid of these guys. I have a mess. All right, so now that you've made an FPP block, let's talk about how you determine how to cut your fabrics and align pieces. For this project, I told you exactly what sizes to cut. But how do you figure it out if your pattern doesn't give that information? So here's how I measure to determine the pieces I need. So I'm just going to grab this other pattern out of here, and we will look at it. So I get myself a ruler, and I like this one because it doesn't have all the color on it. And I start by aligning it along each shape, and I add seam allowances around all the sizes to determine what size I need to completely cover that shape. And then I add a little extra for wiggle room and to extend beyond the borders. So for instance, for piece A1, which is this one, I laid my ruler right on top of that. I put the 1/4 inch line along the seam allowance. I let a little hang out over here, and I just looked to see. So I could see here that if I cut a piece that was 2.5 inches wide, actually no, because here's my seam and I want it to go a little beyond that, 3 inches wide would be plenty. And if I go to here, that's 1 3/4 inch wide by 3, that would be plenty. You noticed here there was really very little waste when we trimmed that away, and for the precision and ease that this method gives, I'm completely fine with trimming away and throwing away a little bit of fabric. So for the geese, I decided that I wanted to cut triangles because it would be much easier to do the piecing as I went, and I wouldn't have so much waste. So I aligned my ruler along one of those long edges, and I determined, so if I had a square here and I wanted it to be, let me look at this, square cut in half. So I needed to go this way. So if I cut, and here's my outside edge, so I have to go all the way out here, and I have to go at least past here. Here's 2.5 inches. If I cut a 2.5 inch square from there to there, I would, and cut that in half, because this is the outer edge of the square, that would work well. Could have gone a little bit bigger. I didn't have much to trim on those, but it was plenty. For the background triangles, I decided to cut squares into 4. So I had the square and I cut it diagonally each way. So positioning my ruler on those pieces, so this actually then is the outer edge of that, made me think that a 2.5 inch square would work. But when I tried that, I just didn't have as much wiggle room as I like. So I went all the way up to a 3.5 inch square, and you could see I had plenty to trim there. But again, to waste another inch of fabric on a few pieces was well worth it to me. So always make a test piece before cutting all the pieces for your project. Once you've decided on a size, make sure that it will work. I wanted to show you the patterns for the Feeling Crabby and the Air Show because those have some unusual shapes, and kind of explain how I figured the sizes on those. So here's the block to make the crab for Feeling Crabby. So this is one section, which is this piece right here that makes, where's one going that right way? So this one, so it makes the body and these pieces. And then you have another short section here that makes the 2 legs. And then you have another section over here that goes like that, that makes your legs up here. So let's talk about this piece, because this is kind of an unusual piece. So when I'm going to do this, here's piece C1, here's piece C2. So I'm going to do this seam first. So I would align my piece. You could actually do this one first if you want, which might actually be easier because it's a little bit bigger. But either way, I'm going to align, we're going to go with this one because it's going the right way. We're going to align the 1/4 inch mark on our ruler up with that so that we've got our seam allowance. So here's the edge of the piece right here. Here's the edge of my block, and here's the bottom of my block right here. So I can go here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, I'd need at least 4.5 inches, and width-wise I need, I'd say, at least 7.5 inches. So I would probably cut like a 5 by 8 inch piece for that, to know that I have plenty of wiggle room. And then this one, I would do like I did on the other one, where I measure the size of the square, cut it in half. I'd have another piece of background left for another block. Same thing here. And this pattern actually has all the instructions included that tell you exactly what to do. Somewhere here, I actually wrote that out and labeled the pieces. Okay. So I actually did it the way it was written. I put my piece that I cut on there, and I put my little piece right in the middle to line that up, and then I'm ready to sew that seam across there. So one thing that I would recommend that you do, on today's block I color coded them so that it was easy to tell. Plus, it's an easy block. You can tell where the geese are. You can tell where the background is. If you look at this, it's not as easy to tell. So I went through here and I put R on all the pieces that I wanted to sew with red fabric. I didn't bother to label anything else because everything else is blue for the background. But doing that is going to make it much easier when you go. So on here, when I decided I needed 5.5 by 7.5, which is that first number that I had, so that would be plenty big. Another way that you can tell, and I'm going to dig out one of the air show blocks here. So here is the block that makes, on the one airplane that makes that angled one. So you can see you're going to start with this piece over here and you're going to add that piece. So the pattern here again tells you exactly what size, and it again has you start with a rectangle, which you'll position in place, and it tells you to align the 8-inch line along here. If you want to make sure that your piece is going to cover the shape, one way that's easy to do that is to take your two pieces once you have them positioned and just fold it over the fabric, but you can also do the same thing here and fold the fabric or the pattern back this way as you have it in place and make sure that it's aligned. So there you can see you've got a lot of extra hanging out all the way around, but it covers all the shape as you go all the way around the piece, and then you just trim those as you go to make them fit. I find that rectangles work the easiest. When I first started, I worked with strips, and trying to figure out where to arrange the strip on there, I just found it easier to kind of look at the shape and cut the pieces out. If you're doing a block that has all kinds of unusual pieces, you might pick kind of a standard size that will work for several and do those all at once. All right, I need another drink of water. And I have one more tip that I want to share, and this is kind of a little bit for more advanced piecers. But one thing about normal paper piecing is that you really don't have any choice over how your seams are pressed. As you saw when we worked today, they have to be pressed toward the piece that's being added. And sometimes you don't want that. I kind of prefer to have the flexibility of pressing the seam in the direction I choose. So for instance, on this crab block for feeling crabby, I want it to have all the seams pressed up underneath the crab's body, so that crab kind of looks like it's floating above the surface of the quilt. If I had my seams pressed out this way, you wouldn't have that same option. So how do you do that on a block, for instance, that makes the body of the crab? So to give me the option of doing that, I just make one change to the pattern. So when I've got my pieces aligned here and I'm ready to sew these together, so typically I would turn it over to this side and I would sew right here along the line through both of them. What I do in this case is I just fold the pattern back along that line and I stitch right along here. So I'm not sewing through the paper, but I'm sewing right through that seam line where that seam line is. And I'll start about right here, I'll end about right here, and then I can proceed just as the pattern directs, folding the piece over and pressing it. I will add a little glue or a little basting tape there to hold the fabric in place on the paper pattern, so that as I proceed to finish piecing the block, I don't have any stitching holding it in place, but that does that. And I have seen people do that through their whole block so that they never have to tear the paper away. So keep that in mind. That was a little trick that I discovered, I think, as I was working on that, because I really wanted that seam to be up under the crab. So give that a try. Check and see. Let's see if we've got any questions. I've got a mess on my table. Well, first question is about the local quilt shop contest. Can you vote more than once? Technically, no. You can vote once per email address, and we do go through the votes and do a process called dedupe. So if the same email address votes for the same store more than once, we'll read through them, pick the one that has the best comment, keep that one, and we eliminate the extras. That said, A lot of people have more than one favorite quilt shop, and so you may live in Canada and come to the US, and so you've got a favorite shop in Canada and a favorite shop in the US when you visit here. Yes, you could vote for both of them because we only can do that dedupe per store. So technically, yes, you could vote for more than one store, but you can't vote for one store more than once. Hopefully that explains it. Doesn't all the ironing flatten out the paper folds? No, as you saw, those folds were still there, easy to fold again along that. Once your paper is folded, it has the memory of where that fold was. And yes, it flattens the paper somewhat, but the folds are still there and easy to fold along. Doesn't matter if you sew from point to border or border to point. I don't think it matters. I just go whatever is the easiest when I get it under the sewing machine. What brand of iron are you using? This is Oliso's little iron. True confessions, this is the first time I have used this iron. I took home the little Tula version of it that we had last night so that I could practice, and I plugged it in and it never got hot, and I thought I must have a defective iron. I'm really bummed, but that's okay. We'll use it as a prop. It's nice to have in pictures. And I plugged this one in today to get ready, and I had the same problem. And then I realized that this little button right here, to me it was on. You have to press it to turn it so it turns green, and then it's on. So I never had that other one turned on, so I'm sure it works just fine. But it's a really nice little iron, and one thing I really like is it has a light here right at the front that kind of I can see being really helpful. The other thing that's nice is it doesn't have a lot of holes in the bottom to catch on things, so nice little iron. I'm impressed. So that's the Oliso little mini iron. Are the geese and background triangles the same size? No, they are not. And you want to make sure that you download the pattern. We cut the triangles for the geese were 2.5-inch squares cut in half diagonally. The triangles for the backgrounds are 3.5-inch squares that we cut both directions, but they end up being a different size. I don't have one of the background triangles here. What ruler are you using for trimming up? The blue tinted one is an OmniGrid ruler, and it is number RN 39G-32 by Annie Blue. I love it. Is that all the questions? All right, that was easy. I hope you enjoyed sewing along with me today and that you made good progress on your FPP Flying Geese border. Again, don't forget to send us photos of your finished block and where you use it. I can't wait to see your Piecekeeper projects or see other projects that you may have incorporated into, or other FPP blocks as well. There are lots and lots of amazing FPP patterns out there, so branch out, try some more using the skills that you learned today. The more you practice, the easier it's going to become. And I really strongly feel that foundation paper piecing is a skill that every quilter should have in his or her bag of tricks. It's going to open a whole new world of piecing to you. As always, please ask for our patterns and supplies at your local quilt shop. These shops are such an important part of our sewing and quilting communities, and as I always say, it really is up to all of us to keep them strong and vibrant. If they don't have these products, they can certainly get them. Fabrics from their favorite manufacturer, ByAnnie patterns and supplies from their favorite distributor, or directly from us. And we're always happy to set up wholesale accounts for qualified shops, so just ask them to contact us for more information. Quick drink. And please remember to vote for your favorite shop in our local quilt shop contest. Shops really love reading your comments and seeing how much you appreciate their hard work. And with the addition of the Creative Hub Award, your comments are especially important. As of today, Ohio has nearly 60 stores in the running. Actually, this was as of last week, with over 800 votes. Texas had set a record with 95 participating shops. Michigan is a battleground state with 3 stores already surpassing 100 votes as of last week, which makes for an exciting race. And quilters and craft enthusiasts are really rallying behind their favorite shops like never before. So go to our Instagram and YouTube channels to check out the fun video that we made last week, sharing a news update of the contest. And we would really love to get more engagement there, so like, follow, and share. And thank you again to everyone who joined us today. We will be back not next Wednesday. That's stuck in my head. We will be back on Wednesday, March 5th at 2 p.m. Mountain Time with another really fun episode of Live with Annie. We are going to be joined by Bob Purcell of YLI Threads, and he's going to talk about needles, threads, tension, and more. Bob has more than 26 years of experience in the thread industry, and he promises to solve over 98% of your thread, needle, and tension issues. So you won't want to miss it. Mark your calendars now. And until then, happy stitching!